Hi there, can you hear me? Sweet, sounds good. I affirm the resolution that religious people have more morals than atheists. Let's get some definitions so that our debate is clear, and then we'll begin with two central arguments. First, that of religion. Religion, defined by Oxford, is the belief in and worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal god or gods. Now, the next term is morals, and this definition matters, so pay attention. This is also from Oxford Dictionary. It says standards of behavior, principles of right and wrong. Now, what's important to emphasize before we continue is that morals themselves aren't necessarily good or bad. They just indicate that there are standards of behavior or principles of right or wrong. Someone who has no morals isn't just doing stuff we don't like. They're specifically lacking principles or guidelines of behavior. Now, the way that we will determine whether or not this resolution is true is through the standard of amount of control. In other words, the more controlling a belief system is, the more likely it's ready to crank out a lot of different principles and restrictions and modifications on how you act. Let's get into my first of two arguments. You can write down as religion controls. Now, many of us know, regardless of whether or not you like religion or not, the nature of a religion is that it modifies your behavior. Because of a belief in a superhuman power or superhuman authority, regardless of whether or not you feel like that's reasonable or not, both sides can agree that factually a religious person is going to have more restrictions on their kind of behavior. A good application of this is the modern Jewish Sabbath tradition. I mean, there's a million things that Jewish theology will say that you can and can't do. You can't turn on the TV. You can't look in a mirror lest you pluck a gray hair, and technically that's work, a violation of God's law. Here's the point. The fact that a belief and an authority is there in religious people, that's the center of their belief, means that their beliefs will always crank out more morals than atheists. They will have way more rules, way more principles, and way more restrictions on what you can or cannot do. Another good example would be, take a look at any of the sort of religiously motivated terrorism that's happened in the United States. Again, all of this is stuff that other religious people disagree with. But it's not because there aren't morals, it's because they are the wrong morals. Religion always cranks out morals, good or bad. The second argument is that atheism doesn't. Now, by necessity, an omission of a superhuman power is never going to grant you more principles of right and wrong. It's never going to grant you more restrictions of what you can and can't do. It's simply a lack of a belief in a superhuman. As such, atheism as an ideology doesn't explicitly prescribe behavior in the way religion does. Therefore, religion has more principles of behavior, it has more restrictions on what you can and can't do, and so it has more morals.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, I'm saying now I'm going to argue that yes, religious people are not more moral than religious people. Obviously, that's not to say religious people aren't moral, just not any more moral than non-religious. Now, religious people used to, put people to death for being gay or working on Sunday or for losing one's religion. But religious, that's no longer considered moral to most religious people. And that's because people have the ability, God revolution, to determine what is right or wrong. And just as people can determine that this part of the Bible is right or wrong, people can, non-religious people have the same ability. So that's my argument. So how's this work? Okay, pass. So let me pose a couple questions to you. So since you're arguing that no one moral or ethical, since you're arguing religious people are more moral, can you name one moral or ethical action that a religious person can perform or has performed that a non-religious person can't?
I think it's important to analyze my opponent's rhetoric. He seems to have misunderstood what the resolution is saying. The resolution doesn't say that religious people are more moral. Translation, it doesn't say that religious people are morally superior to atheists. It says that religious people have more morals. So let's begin at the top of what my opponent said, and we'll get down to answer his question. At the end of the day, my answer to this question is irrelevant because my opponent has misunderstood what the topic is said. He says, in essence, his only argument is that religion has done terrible things. I totally agree. This proves the existence of bad morals. See, when religious people do evil things, like, for example, look at the Crusades or look at religiously motivated extremism that we saw, for example, in 9/11 and many other instances, this isn't a lack of morals. This is simply very evil morals. Morals can be good or bad. bad. My argument isn't that religious morals are better or worse. It's simply that there are more of them. Hence, that is exactly what the resolution says. Religious people have more morals than atheists. They have more principles of behavior, more restrictions on what they can and can't do, and thus they have more. So in answer to my opponent's question, can I name something, a moral thing? We're not talking about the quality of morals. We're talking about the amount of morals. That's what the resolution says.
Okay, so just because a religious person can have more rules that determining their life doesn't mean a non-religious person cannot. They absolutely can. I can crank out a list of hundreds of things that I think would determine a good, better life. Anybody could, not just religious people.
I have a quick question for you. Can you name any religion that doesn't explicitly prescribe behavior?
Let's see. Now, are you referring to, by religion, we're talking just belief in God or something spiritual?
The definition that I gave from Oxford, which is the belief and worship of a superhuman controlling power. Think of the religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. Can you think of any known religion that doesn't prescribe behavior?
Oh, yeah, I can't off the top of my head, but can you think of any person you've ever met that doesn't have their own prescriptions of how they should behave or how people should behave?
Absolutely. There are tons of people that don't believe that morality is this objective, systematic, prescribed set of rules. There's tons of people that don't think that. And answer to my opponent's question, this is very critical. Besides the fact that he's dropped the major arguments, and I'll pass the mic back in a second, don't worry. When I asked him, can you think of a religion that doesn't prescribe morals? He can't think of a single one. And this sends back to my first argument that religion controls. Religion always is going to crank out more rules and more morals, more principles of right and wrong. Be they good or bad principles, there's always going to be more of them. The fact that my opponent can't name a single religion that doesn't prescribe them is evidence of that fact.
Your argument that people can't have I'm obviously, let's see, can you just repeat your original response to the argument that, of course people, I don't understand your counter argument to the fact that, I can't think of a religion that doesn't have any morals off the top of my head.
Yeah, I'm happy to clarify. Argument simply put in a sentence. Virtually all religions prescribe some morals. There are plenty of non-religious atheistic people that do not prescribe morals in a system.
I don't believe that was what you were alluding to before. You're saying just because I can't think of a religion that doesn't have morals, that doesn't mean individuals can't have morals or just as many morals without religion. Now, you said that you know people who have no morals. Perhaps you do. But I think I think anyone would agree that most people do have morals. And you said just because non-religious people, you're saying because non-religious people don't have set morals in stone or tend to not be as set in stone as religious people, that doesn't mean they're not morals. And for you to win this argument, you have to be, you have to make clear to everybody that religious people have more morals than atheists. But the fact is, an atheist can have just as many morals, and people, non-believers, do have just as many morals, but they are not all. Maybe they're not all set in stone. Like you said, that doesn't mean they're not morals.
Very simple response. Some versus more. I agree with my opponent that some non-religious people can have morals and that many people can have fine morals if they're not part of religion. My argument is that you will simply always have more of them once you are part of a religion. Think about this. Do you think that any non-religious person would reach the same conclusions about what to do on the Sabbath on a Saturday as opposed to a Jewish person? Of course not. Religion has way more prescriptions about behavior than non-religion. That's just a fact.
That's not a fact. That's not a fact. I mean, I can discuss moral things with you, not even though I'm not a religious person. I'm going to talk about morals. Like I say, I think it's immoral to, have a leaf blower out, going along outside in the day, bothering everybody in the neighborhood. I can say it's immoral to take food out of the refrigerator because, if it's not yours, or it can be endless, these morals, if you're going to define morals as just thinking something's right or wrong. That's not a high, barrier. You can come up with infinite number of things. I can say, oh, it's immoral to paint, to have, a car that's leaking exhaust instead of getting it fixed. I mean, anybody can come up with thousands of these. And you know what? People have these opinions, have these morals. But not everybody has, a text of, that lists them all that they carry around with them or take to Sunday every day, every week.
And possibility versus probability. My opponent is saying, hypothetically, it is possible for someone to morally condemn leaf blowing on a Saturday because they think it in their head. Do we truly believe that non-religious people reaching the kind of complexity that, say, Jews do about the Sabbath, that is just as probable? Of course not. Let's ask ourselves one simple question. Between these two groups, religions and atheism, which one has an extremely long book typically describing what you can and can't do while you're alive? I think the answer is obvious.
I'll repeat what I said. Just because it's not printed out in text, that, just because an atheist doesn't join a group of people and, go over their list of morals every Sunday, that doesn't mean they don't have just as many morals. And by the way, I know tons of people who would have an issue. I think just as many people find leaf blowers annoying as think that probably more people than think that you should stone somebody for being gay. So I'm sticking to it. Atheists, non-believers have just as many morals, possibly more, than believers. It's just that they don't happen to have them all printed out in text and talk about them every Sunday.
Everyone who's watching to really notice what's happening. My point is saying that yes, in fact, atheists have a potentially even more complex, at least as complex, if not more complex, system of behavior than religions. That's right. We're talking about a book that survived multiple millennia, printed out with descriptions on what you can eat, on what you can wear, the kinds of fabrics you can put on your body. He's literally telling you that all of that stuff, oh, no. Atheists, see, they don't write it down. They don't talk about it. But somewhere in the vast cosmos utopia, atheists have it even more complex. I think this is silly.
It's silly at all. Most religious, because first of all, most religious morals, non-believers share. You don't think you should kill somebody, commit adultery, lie, cheat, steal. Non-believers agree with most morals that religions do. And your comment that it's ridiculous to think that atheists don't have as many morals because the Bible lists rules about what to eat and what not to eat. My God, I know plenty of people who have big restrictions, rules about what they should eat or what not to eat, whether it's because of diet or veganism, vegetarianism.
And my opponent is now bringing up new information. Like some people have certain lifestyles. Veganism isn't a moral. Well, I guess it technically can be. Are we really going to say though that because some people choose to live certain lifestyles in a way that's just as morally complex as a multiple thousand-year-old religion with the text behind it that describes what you can and can't do. Just tag my response as some versus more. My opponent is going to think of a million more hypothetical scenarios where someone could contrive of complex behavior and complex rules. The truth is, religion beat them to the numbers. I mean, religion, good or bad, like it or not, this isn't a statement of quality, it's a statement purely of quantity, has more rules of behavior. That's the way that it's printed down. I mean, how on earth could you get something half as complex as the Bible that you've memorized? How on earth do we get there?
How can you have something as complex as the Bible memorized? Is that your question?
You said, oh, we don't have it written down, meaning we have to have it in our heads. So if the complex morality is in your heads, how a system of morality more complex than the Bible in your head? That sounds pretty insane.
Have to be memorized. Most people haven't memorized the Bible. Most Christians haven't memorized the Bible, much less read the whole freaking thing. And yet, I can have an opinion. I have a moral disposition to tons of issues, tons of things.
My opponent is stepping away from the issue. Look, religions prescribe behavior through an extremely long, complicated, detailed book. If you're going to say that the non-religious people, the people who don't have a book, are more complex, we have a really big question. Where the heck is the proof? Where on earth are these people getting more complex principles of behavior when they're not even writing it down, much less talking about it? My opponent needs to provide some evidence if he wants to have a chance at winning this round to prove that atheistic people do in fact have a more complex, detailed, rigorous, and quantitative system of behavior. I think we all know that good or bad, nice or not, religion has more rules, religion has more prescriptions, and religion has more principles of right and wrong. That's just a fact.
I would disagree that religions have more principles of right and wrong and are more complex, have a more complex system of behavior, because despite using very large texts, that's very limiting. If that's what you're basing, all your morals on, you're limiting it by having all your morals just limited to this one text. Whereas, like I said, non-believers share almost all those morals listed in religious texts, and the ones they disagree with, well, they have their own morals to counter that, and then plenty on top of them. I mean, your argument, you brought up the fact that the religious texts have all these restrictions on whether it's moral to eat this food or not that food. And then you dismissed the fact that non-believers have the same morals. I don't think not eating meat because you think it's wrong to be slaughtering a cow because of that. I mean, you don't need to be religious to have that moral, clearly.
My opponent is claiming that non-religious people share an equal number of morals with religious people. This claim is patently false. There's not a shred of evidence for it. For example, look at how gay marriage was handled in the United States. The debate wasn't atheistic people had this preset dogmatic belief about how marriage should be and said, no, marriage can only be gay because that's what our moral system says. The Christians were people stepping forward and saying, hey, gay marriage needs to not be a thing because our religious texts, our beliefs don't allow it to be so. Religious groups are the people stepping forward with hyper-detailed specific behavior. Atheistic people who don't prescribe to supernatural authority, are less likely to do so because there's not authority from which to derive those rules. This is so simple. I mean, look at, joining a religion is always going to make sure that you modify your behavior. Joining any sort of religious institution means that your life is going to be different. Remember this key warrant. I think the facts are so obvious you don't need me to say this. We all know that religions are far more limiting and restrictive than non-religion. But just think about this. If you were to have a religion that didn't prescribe any system of behavior whatsoever, what would that look like? The fact that my opponent can't bring up a single religion that doesn't prescribe behavior, but we can all in our heads know tons of atheistic people who don't have restrictions on what you can do on Saturday, who don't have restrictions on who you can marry, and don't have preset beliefs about what you can eat. That's just evidence to it. Religions always prescribe more things and more rules than non-religions.
Again, my opponent is bringing up examples of religious morals and then dismissing the non-believer's counter-argument as not immoral. For example, he says that arguing that when religious people argue against abortion, it's because of their morals. But when non-believers, their counter-argument, oh, that has nothing to do with morals, not true at all. A non-believer arguing for women's right to choose, they believe that it is the moral thing to do, whether you agree with it or not. They believe the moral thing to do is to give women the right to control their own bodies. That's immoral. I mean, these are both morals. My opponent still hasn't given any proof that religious people have more morals. Every example he can give you of a religious moral, you will have a non-believer can have a moral argument or a counter moral, or agree with the moral, like I said is the case in most instances. Golden rule: don't steal, don't lie, don't commit adultery, the whole list.
So my opponent is noting a specific example where non-religious people can have a conflicting moral position with religious, and that's possible. Once again, we're asking a general question about religious people. Does religion by its nature prescribe a bigger set of rules than non-religion? I think that's obvious. I want you to remember that most non-religious people form their moral beliefs out of personal intuition. That can be well and good, or it can even be terrible if your intuition is bad. But the truth is, your intuition on its own is rarely going to be bigger than an entire group of people over thousands of years construing hyper-specific detailed sets of behavior. I mean, we're talking stuff like, look at the Bible. Look at, I believe it is Numbers, where Nadab and Abihu offered strange fire before the Lord, meaning, first of all, let's just remember that they had to do this special tradition circumstance thing that no non-religious person was ever doing. Then think about the fact that once they stepped forward and put the wrong kind of incense in and burned it a little bit incorrectly, that God burnt them to a crisp for it. Are we honestly going to say that the non-religious person living several miles away had an even more complex system of behavior than that person? Of course not. Religion is far more complex in its prescription about behavior.
No, this is not true. Here's a simple example. Look at the U.S. legal code. You think the Bible's big? Fucking U.S. Woo! Okay? Of morals right there. What's right, what's wrong, how you should punish it. I mean, that's pretty simple. Case closed.
The case definitely. Legality and morality are different things. It's not a moral statement to say that you should be buckled or that you should have a driver's license. That's very distinct from morality, and it's brand new that you're not bringing it up.
Actually, it's absolutely based on morals. You don't want people driving around with driver's license. It's immoral to be driving a car, endangering other people's lives if you don't know how to drive. It's pretty moral. Makes sense.
It actually does. My opponent's claim only works if all atheists wrote the legal code, and also if all of the law is a non-religious position. It's not a moral statement at all to say there's a weight limit on this elevator. When you look up when the sign says weight capacity 4,500 pounds, you're not like, well, darn, those atheists are back at it again with their morals. Are we serious?
Be immoral. It would be immoral. The reason you have that law is because it would be immoral to build an elevator that would get people killed if too many of them stepped onto the elevator.
He didn't write U.S. legal code.
You don't know that. A mixture of religious people and non-believers make these rules that we all live by that far outnumber the rules in the Bible.
Meaning that we're not comparing religious people, we're comparing a mixture of people's ideas together. This isn't a test of the resolution, not even close to an argument.
I was responding to your argument that nothing compares to, well, the U.S. legal code. It's not religious. It's a big part of the U.S. is, the separation of church and state. It's not religious. And like I've said before, an individual that happens to not be religious absolutely can have more morals, and and very possibly would, because they're not limiting themselves to a book.
Not limiting yourself to a book doesn't mean that you have more rules. Rules are written down because they cannot be memorized single-handedly, and they are easy to hand from generation to generation. Atheists do not have more complex systems of behavior than religions. That's why religions have books, traditions, rules, rights and wrongs, and even beliefs about the afterlife. For gosh sake, if atheism had more morals than religions, why wouldn't it say that there's any eternal consequence for our action? That's the reason that religion steps in and says, hey, there's a bunch of rules that you're not ordinarily aware of, and if you break them, you go to a really bad place when you die. I mean, I really hope no one sitting here is actually considering and is actually wondering if atheists, by their ideology, have somehow produced a more complex, vast, and numerous set of rules than religious people. Are we really going to say that? Do any non-religious folk step forward and say, hey, I have more rules about what you can do on the Sabbath than Jews? Of course not. No one says that, because religions are always more complex in how they describe behavior.
Again, well, I'm not saying, like I said, I'm not saying that an individual atheist is always good. Obviously a religious person can have more morals, or an atheist person could have more morals too. Again, just because they don't write it down doesn't mean that's not true. Also, I really think it's interesting, your argument that that religious people, their moral system is more complex just because it's old and they have a large book talking about it all. That's ridiculous. It's very clear to me. I'm arguing that a non-believer could absolutely, and probably most likely, has a more complex moral code because it's not simply laid out in a text. For example, a religious person might say, "Oh, abortion is just clearly bad." A non-believer could have the argument that yes, you can have that abortion is okay under the right circumstances, and all this stuff. I mean, or that killing is not automatically bad. What about self-defense? All this other stuff. I mean, just because you have this large text, again, that most religious people limit themselves and they only see through that.
Okay, with the time that's left, let's briefly summarize where the debate round has gone and sum things up with one central voting issue. Now, my opponent has conceded all of my definitions in this round. We know what a religion is. We also know that morals are principles of right and wrong. And of course, that means that they relate to the rules and restrictions people have in behavior. More principles, more rules means more morals, be they good or bad. And less of those means less morals, be those good or bad. Now, my opponent throughout this debate round has made several very interesting claims. He's implied, for instance, that the entire legal code is actually a test of atheistic morality, because either it was written by atheists or it was written by a collection of religious and non-religious. He's gone through statements like agreeing that he can't think of a single religion that doesn't prescribe behavior. Yet we all know that we can think of non-religious people that don't have prescriptions or the same prescriptions on behavior. So let's stem down to this. He says that non-religious people can have complex systems of belief. My response is, won't be as detailed. The beliefs of a non-religious person, by sure, they can have them, but they're never going to be as complicated. They're never going to be as restrictive as an individual. And by never, I mean, yeah, you can theorize one on your own, but we're going to say that atheists are generally more restrictive. The last argument here is general versus systematic. Atheists and non-religious people can have general morality. That's all well and good, but it's not the systematic, prescribed, nuanced, hyper-detailed restriction. For one final example, I want us to remember, we can think of many atheistic friends who don't have rules about the Sabbath. But we all know that religion is where we get those extremely intense, hyper-specific rules that restrict our behavior. So